First off, we have Spider-Man's infamous deal with the devil in the super controversial storyline One More Day featuring the demonic villain Mephisto. While a lot of the entries on this list deal with alternate universe versions of Peter Parker that have gone to the dark side, the Marvel 616 universe Spider-Man has had his fair share of dark mistakes as well. After Aunt May was mortally wounded by an assassin's bullet and all other forms of magical intervention had been exhausted, Peter is approached by Mephisto in the guise of a little girl who offers to save Aunt May in exchange for one thing: Peter and Mary Jane's marriage. While Peter and MJ had noble reasons for accepting the deal, making contracts with demons is definitely a more villainous action than most heroes would take and has led to many unforeseen consequences in Spider-Man's life ever since. In another example of the mainstream Marvel Universe's Spidey crossing a dark line, number 9 has gotta be when he fought with Daredevil to try and kill Sin Eater. Guilty of having killed Peter's one friend on the police force, Captain Jean DeWolf, Sin Eater was beyond redemption in Spider-Man's eyes, and was nearly beaten to death before Daredevil intervened. And while eventually Peter was able to see reason, he was on the verge of beating a man to death, showing just how blurry the line between supervillainry and superheroics can be. Coming in at number 8, we have the tragic death of Mary Jane Watson in the Spider-Man Reign storyline. In this alternate universe, an elderly Peter Parker gave up being Spider-Man decades ago, and has since let New York devolve into a dystopian police state with supervillains being led by the city's mayor. The reason for this old Spider-Man's lack of action is unfortunately heartbreaking, with the love of his life, Mary Jane, having succumbed to cancer after too many years caring for a radioactive husband. And while eventually Peter finds redemption and takes back the city, it still goes to show how dark a world without Spider-Man can be. At number 7, we have Man-Spider, the horrific result of what would happen to Peter Parker if he was a bit more spider and a little less man. Man-Spider first appeared when Angel from the X-Men and Peter Parker were both captured by the villain Brainchild within the prehistoric Savage Lands. Brainchild's plan was to devolve his enemies into more primordial forms, and this left Spider-Man with a hideous appearance, even more limbs than usual, and an unstoppable murderous hunger. While he was eventually able to regain his human form without doing too much damage, every time a villain alters Peter's genetics to favor his spider side has led to massive amounts of internal strife and hunger for human flesh. Speaking of which, number 6 has us talking about the Peter Parker from the Marvel Zombies universe, and this guy's got even more of a thing for eating people than our last number. Zombie Spider-Man unfortunately was infected early on when his world began to fall to the zombie plague, bitten by a half-decapitated Captain America. Before he even really knew what was happening, this version of Spider-Man had consumed the brains of his beloved Aunt May, Mary Jane, and even J. Jonah Jameson. While still retaining most of his personality, this version of Spider-Man was motivated entirely by hunger, to the degree that he even joined in a superpowered mob to topple and devour Galactus when he visited the zombified world. Not exactly the most polite table manners, my dude. Coming in at number 5, we have none other than the Assassin Spider-Man of Earth 8351. Over the years, Spider-Man's had many different kinds of web shooters, from homemade mechanical ones to the biological ones of the Sam Raimi films, but this is probably the only version of Spider-Man where the web shooter is just a shooter, meaning it's literally just a gun. Yes, believe it or not, there's a Spider-Man that just shoots people instead of web slinging. Having abandoned New York in his own universe to become an international assassin alongside of Wolverine, this Spider-Man has entirely given up on great responsibility and seeks only to make a living far, far away from the family he left behind. At number 4, we have perhaps the most well-known occasion where Spider-Man was a villain, because he literally had a villain inside his head. That's right, it's the Superior Spider-Man. After many years of being arch-rivals, Spider-Man was seemingly defeated by Dr. Otto Octavius when the dying supervillain swapped their consciousness around, leaving Peter Parker to seemingly die in the frail villain's body. While Otto was motivated by the desire to be a better, aka superior Spider-Man, his violent tactics and invasive use of Spider-Bot technology were frowned upon by most every other hero, and it was only after surrendering Peter's body back that Octavius would admit that Parker was the actual superior Spider-Man all along. Coming in at number 3, we've got the evil CEO Peter Parker from the video game Spider-Man: Edge of Time. We've been counting through a list of times that Spider-Man has changed or used his superpowers for evil throughout the multiverse, but this incarnation proves that even Spidey's alter ego can go very, very bad. After losing many of his loved ones in this universe, Peter became CEO of the Alchemax Corporation, determined to use his scientific knowledge and time travel to prevent anyone he loves from being hurt ever again in any timeline, no matter what the cost. This version of Peter has also twisted his uncle's beloved words, using the mantra, "With great powers comes great responsibility and great opportunity, and the only way to live up to all that responsibility is to use every opportunity to get all the power." At number 2, we've got Spider-Carnage, best known from Spider-Man the Animated Series, and perhaps the single deadliest multiverse variant of Peter Parker we've yet to see from Marvel. In a world where Peter had an even rougher life, with Aunt May passing away shortly after his Uncle Ben, this Peter was manipulated and abused by the cloning supervillain the Jackal into believing he was not the real Peter Parker. This mental instability was made even worse by the appearance of a Carnage symbiote from another dimension, which latched onto this Spider-Man's confusion and hatred to create Spider-Carnage, a being with endless, insane rage, but also the intellect of a genius. Spider-Carnage's one goal was to bring about an end to all possible realities, something even Thanos wouldn't consider attempting, and he was only able to be defeated by multiple Spider-Men working together to defeat their twisted variant. Finally, at number 1, we've got the death of Uncle Ben, which is perhaps the defining moment in all of Spider-Man's career. Now, I know it may be a little controversial to choose something from Spidey's origin story as the number 1 pick, especially considering how many evil multiverse stories there are, but in my opinion, one of the best aspects of Spider-Man is that he isn't perfect. Sometimes he makes mistakes, even bad ones, and it's how he reacts and learns from these mistakes that make him such a great hero. When Peter first gets his powers, he initially just wants to become famous with them, and winds up letting a thief go when his wrestling gig is barged in on. It's this thief going on to kill Uncle Ben, and Peter's realization of how badly he screwed up, that fully cements in him that with great power comes great responsibility. You don't even have a single Spider-Man story if you don't have this one villainous moment from Peter, one that he's still trying to make up for to this day, and that, in my opinion, is why it comes out on top.
And at 10, Chameleon. Being the first villain Spider-Man ever faced way back in Amazing Spider-Man number 1 in 1963, I think Chameleon is more underrated than he should be. Being able to look like anyone at any time is pretty damn overpowered, especially when you can use it to look like Spider-Man and use suction cups to stick to walls, even if that's slightly unrealistic. This character is especially powerful when he has superpowers, like in the 90s animated Spider-Man series, where he could simply look at you and end up transforming into you. That's actually insanely overpowered when you look at it like that, since he can also transform his clothes in that show. He could be fleeing from Spider-Man and then turn the corner and be anyone, so it's certainly someone to fear, unless they're the original version who has to use disguises and makeup to look like anyone they want, since that process takes time and it can't really be turned on or off at will. And at 9, Mysterio. First appearing in the Amazing Spider-Man number 13 from 1964, Quentin Beck does not possess any superhuman abilities. He is a formal special effects artist, illusionist, and actor who uses his talents to commit crimes. He is a founding member of the Sinister Six as well, which is an impressive feat on its own considering how he has no powers. In the first battle with Spider-Man after he frames Spider-Man for robbing the Midtown Museum, Mysterio obstructs the hero's spider sense with gas and dissolves his webbing with chemical abrasive. However, Spider-Man tricks Mysterio into revealing that he was the actual one who robbed the museum, then Spider-Man revealed that he had captured that moment on tape. Mysterio was then sent to jail, blaming Spider-Man for his ruined career. However, the abilities of Mysterio are actually really impressive, with a lot of his powers seemingly only being able to be accomplished with CGI and post-production rather than with practical effects, which is what he was using. And I was actually going to be a special effects artist. I even started going to school for it, so trust me, his stuff is absolutely insane. And at 8, Venom. The symbiote that later became known as Venom was created by the Dark Elder God Null on a desolate nameless planet, where it saved a group of newborn baby rodentoid aliens by bonding to them and transforming them into apex predators. The symbiote's first human host though was DEADPOOL, who came across its prison while on Battleworld and, hoping for a makeover, wore the creature for a few minutes before realizing it was alive and trying to take over his mind. Concerned that his insanity would adversely affect it, DEADPOOL returned the symbiote to its prison moments before the arrival of Spider-Man, whose own suit had been damaged in the battle that was going on outside that DEADPOOL just seemingly was ignoring. Spider-Man had found the prison module that the symbiote was trapped in and activated the machine, which released the symbiote in the form of a black sphere. When Spider-Man touched the sphere, it covered his body and transformed into the iconic black and white costume with large white spider emblems on the chest and back derived from Null's dragon emblem actually. Venom, even though the concept was bought from a fan for what would now be worth $550, became one of, if not the most iconic Spider-Man villain, and with the ability to block out the spider sense, it's a surprise Peter even managed to come out on top. In at 7, Spider-CARNAGE. Spider-CARNAGE is my favorite alternate version of Spider-Man. From what I could find being introduced in the Spider-Man animated series in the 1990s, this version of Peter Parker shared most of his life with his actually good counterpart. However, the difference between the two was that at some point Aunt May also died, being buried next to Uncle Ben. But thanks to some messing around with interdimensional portals, a version of the Carnage symbiote sensed Peter's anger and combined with him, turning him into Spider-CARNAGE, a villain set on revenge and the destruction of all realities. Peter Parker with the Carnage symbiote and then a desire to destroy reality, oh my god. However, he was ultimately defeated when the main series Peter brought the Uncle Ben from another universe to talk to Spider-CARNAGE and actually brought him down, and made him sacrifice himself to save all reality. Damn, I love this show, I really do. If you haven't seen it, it's on Disney+, please watch it if you can, it's so good. And at 6, Morlun. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2 number 30 in 2001, Morlun is one of the most influential Spider-Man villains of all time. Morlun is potentially the biggest threat Spider-Man has ever faced, even if he isn't the most powerful, since defeating him ended up requiring a whole multiverse of spider people, or as the comics were calling them, spider totems, to take him down. Coming from Earth 1, Morlun uses these spider totems to stay alive, feeding on their energy and casually just hopping around from universe to universe, squashing their spider person. This guy is the backbone of the Spider-Verse concept, and a load of spider totems had to team up in order to actually beat him, but not without massive casualties. So definitely a powerful villain that ended up losing overall, but maybe I guess he didn't lose since he did kill off multiple spider people before his actual defeat. Well, I mean, I guess it depends on how he looks at defeat and what his definition of the term is, since some people could consider killing one person a success, so who knows? Halfway through, and at number 5, Venom 2099. Venom 2099 is actually Kron Stone, the son of Tyler Stone, and as revealed later on, the older half-brother of Miguel O'Hara, who is the Spider-Man of 2099. Talk about family issues. Kron became violent and brutal after suffering for years because of his abusive robot maid. Yeah, this is certainly an interesting origin. Either way, this all drove him into killing Punisher 2099's family. This was also before gaining any superpowers, since the encounter with Jake Gallows, who is Punisher 2099, nearly gets him killed. So Kron flees into the sewer, narrowly escaping with his life. And, you know, since he was absolutely destroyed and hardly clinging to life, he ended up floating down the sewer, eventually running into this strange black ball. This black ball was actually the mutated form of the Venom symbiote that had somehow survived without a host all this time. The symbiote, who was also on the brink of death, bonded to Kron and they became Venom 2099. This new version of the Venom symbiote also had acidic saliva and blood, so that does make him more dangerous than the original Venom, but Miguel was still able to come out on top. Attaboy, Miguel. Spider-Man 2099's costume is so sick, man. And at 4, Carnage. When the Venom symbiote came to rescue its host Eddie Brock from jail, it left an asexually produced offspring behind. This spawn bonded to Cletus Cassidy, a renowned serial killer in the Marvel Universe, through a wound on his hand, merging with his blood and becoming red and black in color. Now going by the name of Carnage, Cletus became a deadly recurring enemy to both Spider-Man and Venom. Eventually, Carnage fought Spider-Man and actually beat him. Realizing that Carnage was another symbiote villain, Spider-Man enlisted the aid of Venom, who was actually retired at the time, to defeat him. After enlisting Venom's aid against Carnage, Spider-Man later used loud noises in an attempt to defeat both Cletus and Venom, which is a stone cold move. However, thanks to Cletus's psychopathic tendencies and the fact that he was created on Earth, he has a lot more abilities than his father, like shooting itself as a projectile and forming razor-sharp weapons to tear through both innocents and his enemies, with chef-like precision, may I add. Getting close to the end in at number 3, Atrocity. Introduced and only seen in the Spider-Man game Spider-Man Edge of Time from 2011, Atrocity was created after Anti-Venom went into a blind rage, accidentally knocking Otto Octavius and Walker Sloan into Walker Sloan's gateway. Time-traveling gateway, by the way. The three then fused in the space-time continuum. I tried getting Taylor to put this on a list for ages, so here I am putting it here because holy damn, this is a villain. Atrocity would occasionally attack Parker or O'Hara with its teleportation tentacles throughout their journey in the Alchemax building, until it eventually revealed itself and attacked Peter Parker. Atrocity was defeated but would later appear again, attempting to kill Peter Parker at the same time that the CEO of Alchemax was fighting Miguel O'Hara. We, as Parker, manipulated Atrocity into attacking electrified pillars, stunning it. Peter then took this opportunity to remove Atrocity's tentacles and send them through the time gateway. These tentacles were then used to drain the Alchemax CEO of his powers. After both Atrocity and the Alchemax CEO, who is revealed to be Peter Parker, were vulnerable, they were knocked into the gateway together simultaneously, resetting the timeline. This absolute monstrosity is also able to teleport himself through time and space, in the addition to all of his powers. So yeah, an atrocity for sure. Penultimately, in at number 2, Red Goblin. After the collapse of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Carnage symbiote was secured in the Lockbox, a privately run vault at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Agents Crane and Coleman, though, infiltrated the Lockbox and stole the symbiote, delivering it to their employer, Norman Osborn. After receiving the symbiote, Osborn bonded with it to become the new Carnage, hoping that it would be the key to regaining his Green Goblin persona. While the symbiote initially seized control of him, Norman offered to teach it more nuanced and sadistic ways to kill people, an offer that the symbiote eagerly accepted, turning over control to its new host, restoring his appearance and purging his body of the nanites, preventing him from augmenting himself with the Goblin formula. Osborn then used the symbiote to kill Phil Urich, and after pretending to be mortally wounded in a rematch against Spider-Man as the Green Goblin, unveiled his new partner by transforming into the monstrous Red Goblin. Osborn used the symbiote to great effect, incapacitating Spider-Man's allies and loved ones, and bonding a portion of it to his grandson Normie Osborn to turn him into the Goblin Child. Spidey was only able to defeat Red Goblin by taunting Osborn, saying that killing him in that form would only give Carnage the credit and not him, which caused him to rip off the symbiote. Then Spider-Man was able to destroy it. Finally, and at number 1, Graviton. If you're not familiar with Graviton, just know that he's essentially Magneto, but with gravity instead of metal, which is already making you think, oh, and that's exactly right. During the Acts of Vengeance crossover storyline, Graviton essentially crushed Spider-Man in their first encounter, only for Spider-Man to come back and absolutely wipe the floor with him when he got the Captain Universe powers. But that may seem a little cheap when talking about a list of Spider-Man villains. So, how about when Graviton was a part of a group of villains that sought revenge on Spider-Man following the loss of his cosmic powers? Spider-Man was still able to defeat Graviton without the power cosmic. During the fight though, Graviton actually disabled Spider-Man's gravity, sending the web slinger floating up into the sky. But Spider-Man was able to web onto a passing plane before he actually got too high. And then when Spidey got back to the ground and to the fight, he took an unprotected by gravity Graviton out with one single punch. So needless to say, Spider-Man has some pretty sick licks to lay out. And at 10, Peter Parker. With Miles having all the powers of Spider-Man with a couple extra to boot, it's bound to be expected that he would eventually surpass his idol/mentor Peter Parker. However, we expected it after some training and a lot of experience. We see this come to pass though in the pages of Spider-Man. Miles and Peter run into each other in costume and they don't know each other's identity. So Pete demands that Miles unmask himself and, state his name. However, they get into a bit of an altercation because of that. And thanks to the help of a few additions Miles made to his suit, including stingers that cause paralysis and electrified webbing, Miles does end up gaining the upper hand and knocking Peter down, which I have to say shouldn't really have been the case. They should have shown us that the more experienced Spider-Man could still win, since experience is the real currency of the world, but nonetheless, it happened, so it goes on the list. And at 9, Deadpool. Deadpool is such a charismatic character that you'd think he'd pair perfectly with the quick-witted, constantly quipping Webhead. However, in one episode of the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, Peter was introduced to the one and only Wade Wilson, the merc with a red leather covered mouth. Kinky. The fight quickly turns into Peter and Wade literally slapping each other, so it's safe to say that this is bound to be interesting. However, Deadpool somehow pulls Peter into his mind, turning the fights from a fisticuffs to Deadpool hunting a Spider-Man whale with a harpoon, a la Lewis Brinley, and getting trampled with giant animals and verbal puns that caused physical harm. Deadpool is literally a bard using vicious mockery in this scene, and I don't think that anyone can fight me on that point. Straight up, this whole episode is hilarious, and the fact that Deadpool can't say like the word kill just makes me think about YouTube censors, so it's relatable too. And at 8, Fantastic Four. In the Amazing Spider-Man issue 1, we get thrown right into the action with a crossover with the Fantastic Four. But not a fantastic crossover, since the group was actually in the midst of fighting Spider-Man. Spidey took on all 4 members at once, webbing them all up in a way that disabled their powers, including basically hog-tying Mr. Fantastic. The thing is, no pun intended, this fight was all Spider-Man's fault. He wanted to join the Fantastic Four, and figured the best way to convince them to let that happen was to infiltrate their base and kick their asses. However, he learns that joining the team won't actually make him any money, so he called them cheap and leaves, which I find utterly hilarious. He hit the Human Torch with a baseball bat made of web, for crying out loud. How is like a 5th member supposed to join the Fantastic Four? Wouldn't it be like the Fantastic Five at that point? Or like, is Ben getting kicked out? Like, he can go be somebody's pet rock, right? And at 7, Iron Man. Iron Man and Spider-Man may have a father-stepson-like bond in the MCU, however, things in the comments are much more professional than that, aside from the Iron Spider storyline, I guess. There are multiple instances of Iron Man and Spider-Man fighting and Peter coming out on top, like in Amazing Spider-Man number 536, where he had some assistance from the Venom symbiote and actually exploded the Iron Man suit from the inside out. This was during the Civil War storyline where Tony believed that heroes needed to register their secret identities to be able to continue fighting. After this, however, Spidey does join Iron Man's team and reveals his identity as a result. This then leads to the One More Day storyline that some people believe to be the story No Way Home is inspired by. However, now Spidey takes on Iron Man as Peter Parker, using his organic webbing to string him up real good. There was also the Amazing Spider-Man number 588 fight where Tony shuts down the Iron Spider suit with a voice command, but Peter had built in a counter voice command and surprises Tony, managing to web him up and flee. The counter voice command, I guess, was also surprised. So, that's pretty funny. And at 6, X-Men. This is certainly another interesting number, since Spider-Man had struggled against singular X-Men before, such as Nightcrawler and Wolverine. However, in the Secret Wars storyline, he took on the whole X-Men team at once and won. In Secret Wars number 3, Spider-Man was eavesdropping on the X-Men to learn their plans. When he heard meeting with Magneto among other things, he decided to drop in and say hi. I guess his body and powers just go into overdrive when he fights teams because, just like with the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man was easily able to dodge Wolverine, Nightcrawler, and more, even though he struggled one-on-one. He really wrecked them, webbing Colossus and Nightcrawler, hanging Rogue from the ceiling, and just obliterating the entire team. Even Wolverine pointed out that they were all lucky all he wanted was information and then an escape, because, quote, he really clobbered us. Halfway through into number 5, Captain America. Within the pages of Civil War II, we expected a battle much like the last Civil War, with moral alignments being similar, along with a couple deaths. However, we were shocked when a battle between heroes was interrupted. This vision that took us away from the action actually ended with an image of Miles Morales holding a dead Captain America. It seemed to be that Miles had also killed him, with blood dripping out of his hand and covering his suit. Would this really come to pass though? Civil War II was based on the belief in using the visions of an inhuman known as Ulysses to prevent disasters before they occurred, and heroes that felt taking action based on these prophecies were irresponsible, which is where this vision of Miles killing Cap came from, since these visions resulted in preventing multiple tragedies but also got War Machine and Hulk killed. But we did see an explanation play out in Secret Empire number 7, when a rage-filled Spider-Man nearly beat Captain America, who was remade by Hydra using the Cosmic Cube, to death after Cap had killed Black Widow. But that's all in the past. 5 years in the past to be exact. And at 4, Wonder Woman. Despite Marvel and DC always being viewed as rivals, they have had multiple occasions where they've had to come together. One such time was in the Superman and Spider-Man comic, which saw the two heroes join together to take on Dr. Doom. The Hulk and Wonder Woman also made an appearance in an attempt to satisfy more fans, and so we could hope that Superman and Hulk would dish it out. However, Dr. Doom very briefly got Spider-Man and Wonder Woman to fight because he said the two were enemies. And while Wonder Woman believed him, Spidey is from this universe, so he knows better than to take Dr. Doom him his word. So Diana tried to capture the bug in her net, which in this case is a giant lasso that makes you tell the truth. But Spider-Man ended up gaining the advantage by simply turning off the lights and letting his spidey sense do the work, after dodging the lasso quite a bit, might I add. Spider-Man ended the fight by simply tapping her on her shoulder and basically saying, "See, I could kick right now, but I'm not. I'm one of the good guys." And that was enough for Diana to stand down, apparently. Getting close to the end in number 3, Hulk. Usually when Spidey fights someone stronger or more powerful than himself, he needs to think on his feet and outsmart them in some way. And you think that would be easy with the Hulk, given that he's just a giant brute with anger issues. But actually, that's not how this one played out at all. In True Believers Spider-Man vs. the Hulk number 1, Hulk challenged Spider-Man at a horrible time. At least, a horrible time for the Hulk. Since Spider-Man had just acquired a new set of abilities which increased his strength, speed, and gave him the ability to go airborne without webs. Spider-Man at this point was actually stronger than the Hulk, so he was trying to avoid a fact for lack of causing permanent damage. Unaliving him, if you will. But when Hulk started to endanger nearby kids, Spider-Man punched him and literally sent him into space. Since he was outside Earth's atmosphere, Spider-Man realized that he wasn't coming back down and flew up to help him, bringing him back down to Earth where he could breathe and not, freeze to death. It's pretty hardcore. Penultimately, in at number 2, Superboy. Marvel vs. DC is one of the best crossovers when looking at these lists. The fights from that crossover were decided by votes, so with Spider-Man being the most popular character Marvel has ever released, you can be sure that he'd end up winning against Superboy, despite the potentially unrealistic scenario that caused. However, it was explained away pretty easily when Superboy broke a water tower and flooded the roof they were fighting on. All it took after that was a conveniently placed high voltage box and some crashing to end the fight for Superboy. I don't know if Spider-Man was aware of this vulnerability, but either way, it went how it went. It also feels like I should mention that the Spider-Man fighting Superboy was Ben Reilly, the Spider-Man clone who goes on to become the Scarlet Spider. And DC fans don't seem to like it when you bring up this fight, with multiple users on a certain forum telling someone who mentioned it to jump on a bed of nails, which I have to say, I've heard better insults, come on. Finally, in at number 1, Silver Surfer. Sure, Hulk is strong and Superboy is part Kryptonian, but Silver Surfer is literally a cosmic being, a herald of Galactus. This man is nuts. And while yes, the fight with him may not really have been there overall, Spidey still technically came out on top, and that's what matters. In Silver Surfer number 14, the flying second place Emmy had a crossover encounter with Spider-Man while surfing over the city, and cause plot to make characters fight, a misunderstanding ensued. So Spidey immediately attacked the Silver Surfer. Let's be honest, on a good day, Surfer would usually just obliterate Spider-Man no problem, or just like flick him and he'd be fine. But on this occasion, the Surfer was actually already weak from a previous encounter, and on top of that, he just didn't want to fight. The Silver Surfer repeatedly tried to avoid battling Spider-Man and even saved Spidey from falling off a building, but Spider-Man wouldn't let up, knocking the Surfer off his board and taking the fight to him on the rooftops. Silver Surfer finally just got fed up with the violence and then made a decision to retreat, but first had to save a child who had taken his board. I mean, like, come on, you could have at least given the kid a few minutes. Him saving the kid is what finally clued Spider-Man in that the Surfer was a good guy, but technically, Spidey wins by default. He didn't die, so that's a win to me. That's what matters.
Number 10. Las Espadas Gemelas de Toledo. This pair is a new set of villains who first appeared in Spider-Woman in issue 11 of the current run that started in 2020. There are two brothers who wield magical swords which seemingly grant them great power, but also kind of possesses them. Spider-Woman goes up against both brothers, Ray and Luis, in issues 11 and 12 and seemingly defeats them both. The brothers end up in a fight against one another, where Luis is forced to cut off Ray's hand as he has become completely ensorcelled under the blade's influence, after he wields them both at the same time. It seems, however, that this isn't the last we've seen of the villains. Ray eventually gets himself a new mechanical sword hand, and both brothers swear to get revenge on Spider-Woman for getting them locked up and pitting them against one another. So while these guys only appeared in a couple issues, we're definitely going to see them again soon. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it where we talk about all of the cool Spidey things, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 9. Trapster. Trapster is one of the members of the all-female Sinister 6 group, Sinister 7 group I guess now, to appear in the Sinister War 4-issue limited series. She is a member of the Sinister Syndicate, which is the name for the all-female team and is led by the Beetle. We don't yet know Trapster's true identity, all we know is that she claims to be the new Trapster and that yes, she spells her version of the supervillain codename without the E, seemingly appearing as the new, younger, and hipper version of the villain. I don't actually know if Trapster is ever a villain who could be made cool, but it seems like this version is at least trying to do that, reclaiming the title and the use of the paste gun with some pride, which you gotta give her points for. Trapster first appeared in the 2017 Free Comic Book Day Secret Empire issue. Number 8. Seiya Ishii. Seiya Ishii is like the new arch nemesis of Silk, who recently made her debut appearance in Silk's newest series starting in 2021. Seiya made her first appearance in issue 1 of the series and is the tech and business savvy daughter of Matsuko Ishii, founder of tech company giant Fujinet, and Silvermane, supervillain and crime lord of New York. Seiya has set out to outdo both of her parents, becoming the new head of Fujinet and also aiming to become an even greater crime lord than her father, or crime lady I guess. In the Silk series she plays antagonist to Cindy Moon and allies herself for a time with the Japanese cat demon Kasha. Number 7. Electro. No, not that Electro, not Max Dillon. Instead we are talking about his accomplice turned supervillain herself, Francine Fry. Francine was obsessed with supervillains and ended up becoming the partner in crime and potential partner in romance of Max's. Back when Max's powers were on the fritz and extremely unpredictable, she kissed him and as a result was electrified, seemingly to death. However, the Jackal would bring her back as a clone. When the attempt was made to restore Max's at the time currently lost powers, something went awry with the procedure and instead it was Francine who ended up superpowered. With her new powers, she herself also became known as Electro. Francine made her first appearance in the 2014 Amazing Spider-Man series in issue number 2. Number 6. Hyperion. While Hyperion has existed for a long time as a member of the Squadron Supreme, we just recently got a seemingly alternate version of him who showed up in Heroes Reborn, which was intended to greatly affect the future of Marvel's main continuity. This alternate version of Mark Milton is currently designated to the reality given the temporary, non-official number of 852. In this reality, Marcus was not just one of the Earth's primary superheroes and leader of the Squadron Supreme, but also found a friend in non-powered Daily Bugle photographer Peter Parker, who appeared similar to DC's character Jimmy Olsen, Superman's pal. Although as we saw from Peter's perspective, he didn't quite feel the same way about his relationship with superhero Hyperion. He was like, Hyperion's a jerk, and Hyperion was like, he's my best buddy. Oh dear. Time will tell if this alternate version of Hyperion will return and perhaps even play a role in the future of Spider-Man, as at the end of Heroes Reborn, in the aftermath shown in Heroes Return, we learned that Hyperion misses the alternate Peter Parker and their alternate reality friendship. Aww. This alternate version of Hyperion made his first appearance in the 2021 Heroes Reborn series in issue number 1. Not to be confused with the other Heroes Reborn series. Just to be clear. Number 5. The Sinister Syndicate. The Syndicate might not be a new single character, but it is a new group of characters that were brought together in the comics. We've already talked about newer characters who are also members of the team, including Francine Fry's Electro and the new Trapster, Hold the E, but the group itself was actually founded by Beetle, making its first appearance in the current run of Spider-Man way back in issue 25. The team is now one of the main competitors in the Sinister War story, despite the fact that they're not actually a Sinister 6 team, they're kind of like a Sinister 7, but it's alright because they're the Sinister Syndicate, so they can still be 7 and be the Syndicate. Currently the team features Electro, Scorpia, Trapster, White Rabbit, Anna's Kraven the Hunter, and Lady Octopus. Number 4. Demogoblin. Demogoblin is the new name taken up by the former Demogoblin. She came to be a sort of reinvented version of that character during the Absolute Carnage event, making her first appearance under this name in issue 1 of Absolute Carnage Lethal Protectors. And while the Venomverse has gone on to become kind of its own thing, it also remains ever intertwined in the Spider-Verse besides. After all, even in Absolute Carnage, Spider-Man was also a main player, as he was one of the few people Eddie Brock trusted during their fight against Carnage and the Cult of Null, aka the Church of the New Darkness, as they were known. Demogoblin was created when Cletus Cassidy as Carnage sacrificed his love Shriek, claiming the codex located in her spine, and also using her death and body to resurrect Demogoblin, hence Demogoblin, who is also really feeling that Carnage love, so yay, I guess. For people that I guess shipped Shriek and Carnage and are like, no more Shriek. It's alright, you have Demogoblin, basically it's Shriek, but it's also Demogoblin, but as a lady. Comics. It's confusing sometimes, isn't it? Number 3. Octavia Vermis. Within the Spider-Verse, there are of course many different heroes and many different villains. Octavia Vermis was one such villain introduced to us in the newest Spider-Woman series in issue number 2, as a new arch-nemesis for Jessica Drew's Spider-Woman. And although her evil plots were seemingly thwarted in the end, you can likely expect that Octavia will return in the future. She was introduced as the daughter of Otto Vermis, a Hydra commander who Spider-Woman herself killed years ago. Octavia, however, is not looking for revenge for her long-deceased father, however. Instead, she's looking to make herself stronger, make the perfect progeny, and have Spider-Woman kind of rule by her side over an epic criminal empire. Fortunately, Jess has other plans for Octavia, but while Octavia might be defeated for now, you can bet this new badass villain will be back, and whenever she does return, I'm honestly gonna be pretty scared for Jess, cause Octavia was pretty crazy. And probably still will be whenever she returns, and is not a dinosaur anymore. A dino person. Number 2. Kindred. Kindred is both a new villain and an old friend of Spider-Man's. For quite a while in the comics, Kindred's identity remained unknown, and many fans pondered just who Kindred really was, as the villain claimed it had emotional ties to both Peter Parker and Norman Osborn. Kindred first appeared in 2018 in the first issue of the current Amazing Spider-Man series, which of course started off in that same year, and as of the time of this recording is still ongoing. Years later, we would learn that Kindred was apparently none other than Harry Osborn, returned from the dead and now part demon, part tortured soul. However, it also seems that there might be more to Kindred than meets the eye, and perhaps the villain is not only Harry alone, but could have even more identities that have yet to be revealed. If he truly is Harry Osborn, who knows? Number 1. Venom. Dylan Brock is the son of Eddie Brock and Anne Wang, Eddie's deceased ex-wife, and is now a huge player when it comes to the world of Spider-Man and Venom, and just the Marvel Universe in general. Dylan initially seemed to have a powerful influence over symbiotes, but lost these powers following the defeat of Null in the King in Black event. However, he recently has taken up his father's mantle, becoming the new Venom in the comics, after his father Eddie basically retired from vigilante life to take Null's place, becoming the god of symbiotes. And if you're wondering if Eddie's cool with it, apparently Eddie is cool with it, so it's all good. Venom had to bond with Dylan to save his life, and so now we got a new Venom. I'm into it.